Let me tell you something. There was a time when I could understand English, read English, and even write English, but I couldn't speak it. And honestly, it was frustrating. I remember one day when I was sitting in my classroom. My teacher suddenly looked at me and said, "Can you tell us something about yourself?" It was such a simple question. I knew exactly what I wanted to say. I wanted to say, "My name is Sarah. I am a student. I enjoy watching movies, listening to music, and spending time with my friends." Simple, right? But when I stood up, my mind suddenly went blank. I said, "My name is Sarah. I am, Then I stopped. Everyone was looking at me. I became nervous. I knew the words, but I couldn't put them together. Finally, I said, "That's all." I sat down feeling embarrassed. On my way home that day, I kept thinking about what had happened. I asked myself, why can't I speak English? I had studied grammar. I had memorized vocabulary. I had watched English movies. I had even written English sentences in my notebook. So why couldn't I speak? That night, I realized something that completely changed the way I learned English. I realized that knowing English and speaking English are two different skills. It is just like swimming. You can watch hundreds of videos about swimming. You can memorize all the techniques. You can read books about swimming, but if you never get into the water, you won't learn how to swim. English was exactly the same for me. I had been studying English, but I wasn't actually using it. So I decided to make one simple promise to myself. I said, "From today, I will speak English every single day, even if I make mistakes." But there was a problem. I didn't have anyone to practice with. At first, I thought I needed a fluent English-speaking friend. Then I realized I didn't. I could start with myself. So the next morning, I stood in front of my mirror. I looked at myself and said, "Good morning." I felt ridiculous. I laughed, then I tried again. "Good morning, my name is Sarah. Today I am going to talk about my day." I stopped. I didn't know what to say next. So I looked around my room and started describing everything I could see. This is my bed. This is my table. There are some books on my table. My phone is next to my books. My room is a little messy today. It wasn't impressive English. It wasn't advanced English, but it was English. And that was the important part. I continued doing this every morning for 5 minutes. Sometimes I talked about my room. Sometimes I talked about my clothes. Sometimes I talked about what I wanted to do that day. Sometimes I just talked nonsense, but I kept speaking, and slowly something started changing. I noticed that I was becoming less afraid of hearing my own English. Then I created another rule for myself. For 10 minutes every day, I would speak only English. No Hindi, no translating, no worrying about grammar. I started with simple topics. I talked about my family. My family is very important to me. I have a small family. I enjoy spending time with them. Then I talked about my hobbies. I enjoy watching movies. I like listening to music. I sometimes spend too much time on my phone. Then I talked about my goals. I want to become successful. I want to improve my communication skills. I want to speak English confidently. At first, my sentences were slow. I made grammatical mistakes. Sometimes I forgot words. Sometimes I repeated the same sentence 3 times, but I didn't stop. And that taught me something very important. If you stop every time you make a mistake, you'll never become fluent. Imagine you're talking to someone and suddenly you forget a word. What should you do? Earlier, I used to become silent, but now I learn to explain the word in another way. For example, suppose I forget the word exhausted. Instead of stopping, I can say, "I'm extremely tired." Suppose I forget the word delicious. I can say, "The food tastes really good." Suppose I forget the word appointment. I can explain it by saying, "I have a meeting with the doctor tomorrow." I learned that communication is more important than finding the perfect word. Then I noticed another problem. I was translating everything in my head. If I wanted to say, "Mujhe bahat book lagi hai," my brain first created the Hindi sentence. Then it searched for English words. Then it tried to arrange the grammar. Then I spoke. By the time I finished all that thinking, the conversation was already over. So I started training myself to think directly in English. I started with very small sentences. When I felt hungry, I thought, "I'm hungry." When I felt sleepy, I thought, "I'm sleepy." When I wanted water, I thought, "I need some water." When I wanted to study, I thought, "I need to study." When I was tired, I thought, "I need a break." I didn't try to think in complicated English. I started with the English I already knew. And after doing this for some time, something interesting happened. English sentences started appearing in my mind automatically. I didn't have to translate everything. If someone asked me, "What are you doing?" I didn't think about grammar. I simply answered, "I'm studying." If someone asked me, "Where are you going?" I could simply say, "I'm going to the market." These sentences were becoming automatic. That's when I understood that speaking practice teaches your brain to respond faster. After that, I changed the way I learned vocabulary. Earlier, I used to memorize individual words. For example, I would write decision, he nirnaenus, improve, he sudhadnaenus, opportunity, he avased enus, confidence, he atmavishwas enus. I could remember their meanings, but when I tried to speak, I didn't know how to use them naturally. So I stopped memorizing words alone. Instead, I started learning phrases. For example, instead of learning only decision, I learned, make a decision. I haven't made a decision yet. That was a difficult decision. Instead of learning only improve, I learned, I want to improve my English. My English is improving. I need to improve my pronunciation. This made a huge difference, because when I wanted to speak, I didn't have to create every sentence from zero. I already had useful phrases in my mind. Then one day I discovered another technique that helped me tremendously. It was called shadowing. I found a short English video. I listened to the speaker carefully. The person said, "What are you doing?" I paused the video and repeated, "What are you doing?" Then I played it again. "What are you doing?" Again. "What are you doing?" But this time I didn't just repeat the words. I tried to copy the person's pronunciation, rhythm, speed, pauses, and tone. At first I sounded very unnatural. The speaker sounded smooth. I sounded like I was reading each word separately, but I continued. I practiced short conversations, for example, "Hey, how are you?" "I'm doing great, how about you?" "I'm good, what are you up to?" "I'm just finishing some work." I repeated these conversations again and again. And slowly my mouth became more comfortable with English sounds. I started noticing how native speakers connected words. I noticed how they didn't pronounce every word separately. I noticed their pauses. I noticed their intonation. And my English started sounding more natural. Then I began recording my voice. Honestly, this was one of the hardest things I did. I opened my phone recorder and said, "Hi everyone. Today I'm going to talk about my daily routine." Then I listened to myself, and I hated it. I thought, why do I sound like that? I noticed that I spoke too slowly. I noticed that I repeated words. I noticed that my pronunciation wasn't perfect. I wanted to delete the recording, but instead I saved it. 1 week later, I recorded myself again. Then I compared the two recordings, and I noticed something. I had improved. Not dramatically, not perfectly, but I had improved. My pauses were shorter, my sentences were smoother, I sounded more confident. That motivated me to continue. I started recording myself regularly. And I followed one simple rule. I didn't try to fix everything at once. If my pronunciation was the problem, I focused on pronunciation. If I was speaking too slowly, I worked on fluency. If I didn't know enough phrases, I learned useful expressions. I focused on one small problem at a time. Then came another important moment in my journey. I finally decided to speak English with another person. I was extremely nervous. I was talking to a girl who spoke English very confidently. She asked me, "What do you usually do in your free time?" I knew the answer, but I was nervous. I said, "I usually watching movies and sometimes I am going outside." The grammar was wrong, I knew it. She probably knew it too, but she didn't laugh. She simply corrected me naturally. She said, "Oh, you mean you usually watch movies and sometimes go out?" I said, "Yes." And we continued talking. That conversation taught me one of the biggest lessons of my life. Making mistakes wasn't embarrassing. Being too afraid to speak because of mistakes was the real problem. From that day, I stopped trying to sound perfect. I started trying to communicate, and that changed everything. I created another rule for myself. I called it my 70% rule. If I could communicate about 70% of what I wanted to say, I would speak. I wouldn't wait until my English became perfect. Because perfection was keeping me silent. Think about it. Someone asks you, "Can you help me?" You don't need an advanced sentence. You can simply say, "Sure, what happened?" Someone asks, "Do you want to come with us?" You can say, "Sure, I'd love to." Someone asks, "Did you enjoy the movie?" You can say, "Yes, I really liked it." Simple English is enough to communicate. You don't need complicated vocabulary to sound intelligent. In fact, one of the biggest mistakes English learners make is trying to use difficult words all the time. I used to do that too. I thought fluent English meant using complicated words, but eventually I understood that natural English is often simple. You don't need to say, I am experiencing an overwhelming degree of exhaustion. You can simply say, I'm extremely tired. You don't need to say, I am unable to comprehend your statement. You can say, I don't understand what you mean. The goal isn't to impress people. The goal is to communicate clearly. After that, I started creating an English environment around myself. I changed my phone language to English. I watched English videos. I listened to English podcasts. I followed English-speaking creators. I read simple English articles. I even started writing my daily to-do list in English. Instead of writing, Aaj mujhe padna hai, I wrote, I need to study today. Instead of thinking, mujhe room clean karna hai, I thought, I need to clean my room. I started using English in my everyday life. While cooking, I would say, I'm making breakfast. While cleaning, I would say, I need to clean this room. While getting ready, I would ask myself, what should I wear today? While studying, I would say, I need to finish this chapter. While walking, I would describe what I saw. The weather is really nice today. There's a lot of traffic. People are walking everywhere. It might sound strange, but it worked. I realized that I didn't need to wait for an English class to practice English. My entire day could become an English class. Then I started keeping a small vocabulary notebook. But I didn't fill it with 50 words every day. I chose only 5 useful words or phrases. For example, one day I learned the phrase figure out. It means to understand or solve something. I made my own sentence. I need to figure out what went wrong. Then I learned eventually. I made a sentence. Eventually, I became confident. Then I learned get used to. I made a sentence. I am getting used to speaking English. This method helped me remember vocabulary because I wasn't just memorizing meanings. I was using the words, and that is something I want you to remember. If you learn a new word today, don't just write its meaning. Use it, say it, write it, put it into a sentence. Try to use it in a conversation. That's how a passive word becomes an active word. Then one day, something happened that I will never forget. I was having a normal conversation with someone. They asked me a question in English, and I answered immediately. No translation, no panic. No long pause, I simply answered. Then they asked another question. I answered again, then another, and another. Suddenly I realized something. I was actually having a conversation in English, a real conversation, not a memorized speech. Not a classroom exercise, not something I had written beforehand. I was thinking and responding in English. I smiled because I remembered that girl from my classroom, the girl who couldn't even introduce herself. The girl who knew English but was afraid to speak. The girl who thought everyone would laugh at her mistakes. And I realized that I hadn't suddenly become fluent. There wasn't one magical day when English suddenly entered my brain. I had simply practiced so many times that speaking became easier. That's when I understood the real secret. Fluency isn't created in one day, it's created through hundreds of small moments. 5 minutes of speaking. 10 minutes of shadowing, one conversation. One mistake, one new phrase, one voice recording, one more attempt, and then another. If you are watching this right now and you're struggling with English, I want you to understand something. You are probably not as bad at English as you think. Maybe you simply haven't practiced speaking enough. Maybe you're scared of making mistakes. Maybe you're trying to translate every sentence. Maybe you're trying to use difficult vocabulary. Maybe you're waiting until your English becomes perfect before you start speaking. But you don't have to wait. Start with what you know. If you know only simple English, use simple English. Say, I am hungry. I am tired. I am busy. I don't understand. Can you repeat that? Give me a minute. I'll call you later. I'm not sure. These simple sentences are incredibly useful. And once these become automatic, you can build longer sentences. You don't need to climb the entire mountain in one day. You just need to take the next step. So if I could go back and give my younger self one piece of advice, I would say, stop waiting for perfect English. Speak with the English you have, make mistakes, get corrected, try again, and keep going. If you want to start today, here's exactly what I want you to do. Take your phone, open the voice recorder, and speak for 2 minutes. Talk about your day, don't write a script, don't translate, don't worry about grammar, just speak. You can start like this: today I woke up at, then continue. After that today I felt, tomorrow I want to. If you don't know a word, explain it another way. If you make a mistake, continue, don't stop. Tomorrow, do it again. After a week, listen to your first recording. After 30 days, listen again. You will probably notice something. Maybe your sentences are longer. Maybe your pauses are shorter. Maybe you're more comfortable. Maybe you're using better vocabulary. Maybe you're simply less afraid, and that is progress. Remember, you don't need to become fluent overnight. You just need to become a little better every day. One sentence, one conversation, one mistake, one improvement, and eventually you'll look back and realize, I didn't suddenly become fluent. I simply refused to stop practicing. So don't wait for confidence before you start speaking. Start speaking and confidence will follow. Don't wait until your grammar is perfect. Speak now and your grammar will improve along the way. Don't wait until you know thousands of words. Use the words you already know. And most importantly, don't be ashamed of your mistakes. Your mistakes are not your enemies. They are your teachers. The girl who once couldn't answer a simple question in English eventually learned to speak. Not because she was naturally talented, not because she had perfect grammar, not because she knew every English word. She simply kept practicing. And if I could do it, you can do it too. So start today, speak for 5 minutes, then 10, then 15, talk to yourself, practice shadowing, record your voice, learn useful phrases, think in English, and have real conversations whenever you get the chance. You don't need to be perfect, you just need to start. Because one day you'll be in a conversation and suddenly realize that you're no longer translating every sentence. You're no longer afraid, you're simply speaking. And at that moment, you'll understand something beautiful. You were never incapable of speaking English. You were just learning how. And every time you opened your mouth and tried, you were getting closer. So keep speaking, keep practicing, keep making mistakes, keep improving. And one day, the English you are struggling to speak today will become the English you speak naturally tomorrow. Thank you for watching. And remember, don't wait for confidence to start speaking. Start speaking and confidence will follow.